You can hack people. If I could summarize everything I've learned as an educational psychologist, is that humans are moldable. You get your opinions from the experiences you've had, and no matter what you've seen with your own eyes or heard just about or even found online, one thing is constant. That information either hardened you or changed you. This is the foundation of all influence, and depending on certain necessary forces I'll bring up today, you too can hack others and even yourself. You already know some of these forces, and they are the forces that move and stop all physical bodies. This is Newton's laws in society, how social forces move physical bodies by Wallow the underscore. I don't wake. We're moldable for sure, but there's just one hurdle you have to get past: conflict. As long as forces meet at a point, it's inevitable, living or otherwise. You will fight your boss, your siblings, your employees, your customers, your parents, your children, your lover, your pets, your neighbors, your government, your phone. You fight anything you can. Conflict is everywhere, constantly remaking reality. But wait, where does conflict even come from? Is it external or internal? Can every conflict be resolved? Why do we respond to conflict differently? Can you predict people's reactions? Finally, is conflict inherently good or bad? This episode is about conflict, acceptance, and how they interact with identity. It's also about how Newton's laws work as a compass for navigating this hot soup. Greetings, agent. Welcome to the underscore. Before we even begin to consider these questions critically, here's a short break. You'll need it. You hate school until you hack it. I got a 4.83 GPA in a course I didn't even like without having to work more. How? I hacked myself. Go to recessabeg.com right now to get my practical guidebook. You can hack school and hack yourself too. Once you grasp it, your full potential will become too easy. Link in the description. Hey Google, state Newton's first law.
On the website www.1.grc.nasa.gov, they say, Newton's first law, inertia. Newton's first law states that every object will remain at rest or in uniform motion in a straight line unless compelled to change its state by the action of an external force. This tendency to resist changes in a state of motion is inertia.
In simple terms, is that nothing lasts forever unless it's easier to stay that way. An example of this is, let's say you're riding your bike down a hill. Newton's law says you will keep riding that bike down a hill. You won't stop unless there are reasons for you to stop. Maybe it could be that you get tired, the road ends, but basically, as long as that slope is infinite, you will keep riding that bike. And it's funny to think about, but an object in motion, let's say you buy a fridge, it stays in your kitchen and doesn't move. You are used to it already. And why I simplified as nothing lasts forever unless it's easier to stay that way is that it's the same concept in the law of thermodynamics, aka entropy or chaos, where an orderly system moves towards chaos. Like this is constant throughout the world. You like food will grow and it will decay, you will live and you will die. As Chinua Achebe says, things fall apart. But let's talk about how it translates in society. I call it the law of finity or inertia. You change with your environment and change your environment. Dead, alive, unborn, or otherwise, forces influence this world and change it continuously. I call this potential the agent of chaos, and we'll get to that in a bit. But first, let's imagine you and I were part of a remote island tribe. We have our customs, we have our systems, but we don't know exactly how our ancestors got here. But we shall know that we love it here. We have our diet, we have our whatever. Newton's law says that we'll continue to live the way we are living unless something forces us to change. And it's true, because what we already have things that keep us happy. We have our relationships with one another, we have our sexual satisfaction, we have our source of food, we have everything else, a sense of pride, blah blah blah, everything, we have it. And now the agent of chaos, which will force us to have to change our ways, is who I'll describe as, or whom, I mean, they don't necessarily have to be a person, because look, the agent of chaos could be a bizarre child born to normal parents. They could be a storm that destroys everything we have. It could be a disease. It could be a new resource we found that changes our standard of living forever. It could, there are so many records of that in history, by the way. It could be a stranger that comes to our land and questions our customs. It could be a set of conquerors that come to take our land or take people from the land, whatever, take our resources. That is the agent of chaos in that case. And it doesn't just apply to like a static tribe. If we were a nomadic tribe always moving around, it would still apply this law of finity, because what was constant to us was that we keep changing our environments. But as we moved on, we discovered, or we will discover, some resource or some new reason to stay in one place. Maybe some place that is just better than everywhere we've ever been to, and we no longer see the need to move. And that is just the expression of the agency of chaos, in the sense that we are constantly in flux with our environment, and the environment is in flux with us. If such change is bound to happen, can we say conflict is external or internal? I can't answer that question for you. You have to answer it. But I think conflict shows our nature and uniqueness and brings change. Because one thing about people is that we will resist change until we can't anymore. The changes you don't resist and the changes you resist, there's a difference between them, and I'll get to that in a bit. But we will resist change until we can't anymore. That is, until our environment forces us to. That's why I call it the law of finity, where you change with your environment and change your environment. You can apply this law to design any environmental system. It could be, you can design a school, a religious system, a banking system, a monetary system, a business, anything social, a friendship, a relationship, a dynamic with your family, anything that involves social forces. Once you keep this in mind, you can properly design, at least to 1/3 of a good extent, because there are still 2 more laws you have to listen to, an environment that will work. You can also even design your own habits and lifestyle successfully to achieve the goals you want. That's what I was talking about in that book previously, where now you have an actual state and you have a desired state, and the difference or the distance between them is your systems. Now, if you don't know how to design those systems, you find yourself struggling and not finding the results you want. So that book is basically breaking down how to build a system for yourself, one that feels natural for yourself. Of course, I have to add my books so I can go and buy it. We resist change when it's easy. To understand this inertia, let's dive deeper. How do we resist change and conflict today? First, most people will rather complain than change. It's a cheap way to feel in control of the situation. Some do little or nothing. They might decide to develop attachment to maybe solitude. It could be social life and living. It could be alcohol. It could be substances. It could be family. A form of just an attachment that distracts you from the things that you actually care about and want to change. Some can just form attachments to maybe a partner that gives their whole lives meaning. Some will just pray and leave it for God. I mean, some others, will procrastinate or rationalize. That's the second way people resist change today. They will rather talk about it in a way that they're like, okay, I can handle this later, or I don't have to handle this. Blaming someone or something else is always easier than, taking on the task by yourself. The older generation will blame the younger generation for the way the world is. They're like, oh my god, the world is spoiling. I mean, they might be right, they might be wrong, who knows? We too will blame the next generation for how the world is spoiling. Patients ignore treatment. They can have any reason. I've met someone who needed a job and he got help to find a job, and he got to the interview and said, his spirit said he shouldn't take the job. I'm not his spirit, right? But to me, who is an external observer, I'm like, this is exactly what you've been wanting. Why would you turn it down and then make no other attempt to find any other job? Who are you waiting for to solve this problem for you? There are some employers that will hire people and still be doing their jobs for them because they just believe nobody can do it like me. I'm the best at it, blah, 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 blah. And the third way people actually resist or respond to change is the few that actually take timely action. These are the people that have the hard conversations, they make the hard apologies. They tend to lead things like rights movements, protests and riots, sometimes terrorism and coups. They are action oriented. They believe there's no time to waste. We have to handle this problem now. We all know we can't stop change. Yeah, most of us keep trying to. But should we embrace all changes? To answer this, let's think about a constant that is older than all of us. What makes an organism work? Identity. To have identity means you have standards. You don't just accept anything. On a cellular level, you have identity. You will act in ways to preserve yourself. So what happens on a social level? Before we answer that question, let's think about it biologically. An organism, for me now, for example, the boundaries of myself as an organism are physically determined by my skin, which is my interface between myself and the world. Everything within this skin and beneath it will work to preserve this entity that is me. Now, on a social level, you also have a social identity and boundaries that work to preserve the social entity that is you. Those boundaries tend to be easily influenced by education. Now, while I was learning educational psychology, the definition of learning stood out to me. It's not when you just put something in your head and put it down on paper. According to educational psychology, learning is where you accept information so much that it becomes, or so well that it becomes part of you. For example, you've been told that you are African, and all signs point to yes, so you've accepted that, and that has assimilated into part of your social identity. I am African. It's not just about classrooms. Now, something like this, which can be innate, the African example, can be used to create insecurities by setting standards for you. Because now, if you are African and somebody says something about Africans, then you begin to feel like that applies to you. So, education creates insecurities sometimes by setting standards for you, setting your own standards. Who should tell you how to feel about yourself? That's where most social anxiety comes from. You're like, am I meeting the standards that others have set? Because to be part of a society means that you as an entity are contributing to this network, and it has its own rules and norms and all that. That sort of thing closes your mind to some things and opens them to others, because once you are part of a network, there is like a creed, a code, there's a way the system or the organism works to preserve itself. So an organism has to close itself to some things and open itself to others. Only opens itself to things that it considers beneficial and closes itself to things that are not unwanted. If nonsense enters your body, your white blood cells, they go and stab it. In fact, you as a baby, you could have been killed by your mom's white blood cells if you didn't develop a placenta. It's kind of a diplomatic thing by the very cool stuff. Diplomatic thing by the human body, where you beg your mom's body, like, I beg, oh please don't kill the child. This is like, I want this here. I'm wanted here. So that's what your placenta is. It now connects to your mom's uterus and allows you to take nutrients from her body because you can eat for yourself during that period. But being an organism in that sense where your mind is closed to some things and open to others means it's only harmful at low quality. Why do I say so? Being open-minded is not all that. In terms of cultural resilience, new ideas can't compete with cultural resilience. There's no amount of Western influence that will make Africans stop eating soup and swallow. It's just not possible. This is our identity. This is what our ancestors found, developed, and brought for us. And sometimes open-mindedness can end up being a Trojan horse that is designed to mess us up. Now, our food, for example, is very healthy. If we begin to prioritize like junk food that other races and countries consider like, oh, this is our standard of good shower and whatever, we begin to lose out on the health benefits that we should have, that we're not even considering, oh, what was the good in this? We're just so interested in being open-minded that we lose out on the things that are supposed to be important to us. That's why mainstream is always late to any advances. It's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but mainstream is late because cultural resilience will try and destroy any form of new changes. People want things to be this way and this way. They don't want it to change too much. If it changes only a bit, they don't want it to change too much. Do you get? So, and the second point actually of why I say low quality education is the only part of education that can harm you is that all conflict comes from identity. The desire for survival, a misunderstanding, a quest for control. You fight someone because of who you are, and they fight you because of who they are. You guys may not just see eye to eye on it. You can only fight also for territory you know about. Even if you might feel the conflict, but you won't be so eager to take control of that situation if you are not aware of what you should be fighting for. But to summarize this section, I'll just go ahead and say conflict and change is neither good nor bad. And if it's true, that means you two are an agent of chaos, dead or alive, capable of influencing this world and changing it in amazing ways. Even children unborn will change this world through conflict. Conflict is an important part of life. We can't avoid it, but we thrive by learning to surf it. So I'll round up with a story and a quote. Do you know why Socrates was killed? I was surprised to learn that his people killed him mainly because he stood against democracy. He felt people are not sharp enough to play the games that politicians play on the level they do. Because, like I said previously, if you don't know what to fight for, you are not empowered to fight for it. Socrates was accused of turning the youth of Athens against the government because he inspired them to think critically. Now how did they kill him? They made him kill himself. They asked him to drink poison. He had chances to escape. He didn't. He decided to drink the poison to prove his own point. But here we are today, how many years later, still suffering. But democracy is not necessarily the problem. It's the people who enforce it. Democracy as a system is not old. It's not new or something that's foreign, especially to us in Africa. The quote, I will talk about this later. The quote I want to bring up is this Leo Tolstoy quote. I'm actually reading his book right now. He says, all great literature is one of two stories. A man goes on a journey or a stranger comes to town. That is the description of the agents or the agency of chaos. And how does this agent of chaos act in this rule where you change with your environment and change your environment? The agent of chaos represents the discomfort that forces us to make a decision. And the quality of those decisions is affected by knowledge and understanding of our circumstances and options. Very critical. Quality education makes the difference between someone who gets themselves hacked by other people and other people's ideals. I mean, if you're living in Nigeria or understand how Nigerian politics happens, you can see this clearly. If Nigerians were more aware, especially on how to sustain themselves and what they should expect or demand from their government, they won't be tolerating such things. In Yoruba cosmology, there is an ideology and force of technology that crushes inertia called Ogun. He is the leader of the blacksmiths, the forger of tools and weapons. He is a creator and a destroyer whose name means order. Chaos brings order. In the next law, we will discuss an interesting variable in social behavior, ease. There's something interesting about, or there's something exciting about how Maslow's hierarchy of needs affects our response to change. As we go higher on the paradigm, things have less and less potency to influence us. And that's why, to keep a people under subjugation, they attack the lower needs, not the higher ones. I tweeted recently, a starving man did not discover pounded yam. I'll explain that after the break. When I say a starving man did not discover pounded yam, if you don't want to know what pounded yam is, go and do your research. I'm not explaining that here. But I'll explain this by using Newton's second law. Hey Google, state Newton's second law.
On the website Britannica.com, they say, Newton's second law, F equals ma. Newton's second law is a quantitative description of the changes that a force can produce on the motion of a body. It states that the time rate of change of the momentum of a body is equal in both magnitude and direction to the force imposed on it.
To simplify that, I would say that the easiest path is always the most appealing. When a force is applied to an object, it will take the easier route. How easy is it for you to move a house versus pick sand from the floor? So these objects have a certain level of resistance to change, right? And they will pick the easier path. If it's easier for a stone or sand to be picked by you, then it will get picked. And if it's easier for you to push a house, the house will move. So in the pounded yam proverb or whatever, this sort of innovation or whatever that helps society move forward cannot be found when people are hungry. It's just not possible, because do you know how much energy it takes? You spend hours pounding the yam just to make sure that you get that quality, that consistency and everything. That's not something you do when you're hungry. The people that discovered pounded yam discovered it from a position of abundance, because they already had yam. They could fry it, they could boil it, they could grind it, they could do anything they wanted to do with it. And they decided to spend their energy to pound it, because, I mean, they didn't have machines then, but they were ready to do the work. They were strong enough. But at the same time, they had, I mean, you should be strong enough. If you're not strong enough to pound yam, happy to you. But they had reasons. They decided to improve their own diet. Now, back to the second law, where I described as an object will always decide to follow the easier path, right? Nothing lasts forever unless it's easier to stay that way. So tying the first law to the second law, let's go back to our island and talk about how this second law translates in society. So now, back on that island, life is more dynamic, because we are not living our lives like someone riding a bicycle down a never-ending slope. Instead, there are different variables and factors that force us to change, and that we force to change too. We accept some changes, we reject others. An agent of chaos would typically get in trouble for resistance against what we have as cultural norms, unless certain conditions are met. because every society has a code it is hell bent on maintaining. It's what gives people their social identity, but it can be hacked with this law without members even realizing what's happening. I call it the law of effect. Nothing changes until there's a valid pinpoint and a clear way out. That is how I would describe Newton's second law in society. The change is acceleration. If you're a physics student, you know this equation: F is equals to ma, where F is force and m is mass and a is acceleration. Now, acceleration is the rate of change, right? The way out is the force. You know how forces are drawn in physics as an arrow, a line with an arrow. This is the direction I want you to go. This is where you want it to go. And then the pain point is inside the mass of the object. But this is how all scams work, right? By fulfilling this law. And all policies are designed also by fulfilling this law in any social environment. It has two conditions to work. One, relevance, a relevant pinpoint. And two, ease of adoption. How easy is it for me to push a house versus how easy is it for me to even decide to push a house? So there are two things: whether I'm capable of doing it, whether it is a valid pain point to me, and whether it is something that is easy for me to do. So what that means is, if we draw back to that pounded yam example, do you think people would have found pounded yam or tried to develop pounded yam if they didn't see any reward in it? And it could not have been hunger that motivated them to pound yam for hours on end, like I said. So if any attempt does not work, it's because you didn't appease those two factors: a relevant pain point and an ease of adoption. Anybody can be hacked, right? Including yourself. But you just have to appease those two factors. It's also how learning works, why people buy things, and why peer pressure is effective, because it met those two conditions. When everyone is doing something, we are more likely to try it. This can be dangerous. Mainstream cannot guarantee your satisfaction or safety. So why do we respond to change and conflict differently regardless? The short answer is identity. Who you are is what you permit or don't permit. And this has implications for anyone who is trying to change the world or change their world in any way. You have to think like a designer. People will only care about things that appeal to their sense of identity. Yet their responses aren't always straightforward. For example, we love ease so much, yet we only value things that we earn through sweat. I hinted on, or rather at, how going higher on Maslow's hierarchy of needs affects our relationship with change. For example, if the price of your diet becomes outrageously high, you might make more money to pay for it. You might sacrifice other things for it. Or you might change your diet to fit your pockets. People will respond differently. But if you feel out of touch with your sense of purpose and place in the world, what do you do? We only value things we have to sacrifice for. When it's cheap, we'll make excuses for our negligence. But when faced with the truth, most people will hide behind offense, deflection, rationalization, anything to escape the weight of responsibility. They just don't want it. We won't embrace all changes, but when it is the easiest way out, we are most likely to agree to it. It is related to the first law where I said we will try to resist change as long as possible. But now we can speed up that rate, that's acceleration now, of change adoption when the way out is easy to adopt and relevant to the pain point. Because let's say, for example, I see people tweeting a lot where they say they will never pay for something like YouTube Premium, right? They don't consider it a pain point, and there is nothing in their current worldview that will make them pay. But the people who pay know what they are paying for. It's the same, like people who buy in. Money is more complex than just a medium of exchange, but at the same time, that's such an apt definition because you only exchange what is valuable to you. Even though there are social forces that motivate us to buy, your standards of what is quality is based on your environment and your social, your peer group and all of that. But that's not the only factor. Your whole peer group might be buying something. If you don't think it's relevant to yourself, you won't buy it. Hacking yourself, for example, is understanding what options you pick when faced with difficulties and developing new ones that match your goals and identity. That's more of what I discuss in my book. But since society will work on preserving its code, if you find yourself smarter than most people around you, don't be surprised when you get a lot of hate. Nobody likes to feel dumb. Your job is to understand the conditions necessary for your changes to be accepted and design for them. Oh, and get used to your source. You are who you are, no matter how anyone feels about it. You are who you are. I will round up with a quote from the Quran. Are those who know equal to those who do not know? None will be mindful of this except people of reason. That's from Surah Az-Zumar 9. How does the agent of chaos use this law? If you decided to act as the agent of chaos and use this law, you have to study the pain points of the environment you're trying to change, the way out you are trying to offer, and then the identity of the forces involved. The people who you want to change, you are using a pain point to push them to a way out. Have you understood their relationships with both? In existing or potential conflicts, that is how you can sort of predict how people will respond based on their identity. When done well, you can design conflict to influence a behavioral change. You can spot a scam before you become a victim, or you can dissolve conflict before it becomes uncontrollable. Because these things also apply to yourself. You have certain pain points and you have certain ways out you will take. Someone might see a product that sells for 100 naira and buy it because, oh my god, it's a steal. Someone else might see it and be like, 100 naira, it must be a scam. People are different. The Yoruba force and ideology of this in our cosmology is Oshun, the goddess of energy and influence. She is believed to carry a fan in one hand and a machete in the other. Oshun's energy is the manipulation of energy. She's flowing water. In the next law, we'll discuss how people react to the flow of changes. You're very familiar with this one. Now a break. Are you a Nigerian professional struggling to land a remote job and earn in US dollars? I've been there. Apart from working remotely since 2015, I worked in a hiring company for 2 years and I know what they want. You have the skills. I know how to make them pick you. Consult with me at HRQ. Let's get you paid well. Check out my YouTube through the link in the description. Hey Google, state Newton's third law.
On the website study.com, they say, Newton's third law of motion states that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. That is, when one object exerts a force on a second object, the second object in turn exerts a force on the first that is equal but exerted in the opposite direction.
I'm sure you already know that one. Like they say, for every push, there's a push back, now or on the way. The first law says nothing lasts forever unless it's easier to stay that way. The second law says the easier path is always the most appealing. But the third law says for every push, there's a pushback, now or on the way. It explores how and when people will agree to a change or resist it. Let's talk about how this third law translates in society. All matter exists in trade, living or otherwise, down to microscopic levels and even atomic levels. Oh my god, probably even deeper than that, as we'll keep finding. For humans, good relationships are maintained by reciprocity. An act of kindness is different. That's just an isolated, you want to act out kindness. But when you want to have a good relationship with someone, reciprocity is crucial. For trade to exist, we need trust. I talk a lot about the nature of trust in the article version of this, so I won't go into it here before this thing will become too long. But it is the key to fully understanding and unlocking these laws. Conflicts happen because of differences in trade. Both sides want to be satisfied, but it doesn't always go that way. Why? We'll get to that. Back to our island tribe, if we scale up or scale down, you will learn that you've always been part of a tribe of friends, of religion, race, country, species, and group chats. In those tribes, there is always an ongoing war for freedom, for who gets to do whatever they want, who controls resources and thinking. The fundamental nature of trade is differences. If everything was the same, there would be nothing to trade or aspire to. If money is a medium of exchange, it needs differences for it to work. From the previous laws, we see that people will resist change until they can't anymore. This means that if their resistance is limited somehow, they will stop resisting. Typically, dictators do stuff like this by making acceptance the easier option so that they can get away with many consequences for a while. Not just dictators, anyway. Anyone who just wants to get away from consequences, they just make acceptance the easier option. It can happen in a simple conversation where someone tries to make you feel like you don't know what you're saying and insists just so that you can accept their statement as what is. You understand? We all contribute to what reality is. So, whatever the extent the agent of chaos is willing to go to have their own way determines the outcome of the potency of such mechanisms. For example, we don't negotiate with natural disasters, we move on. If a flood comes here and takes us, like Fela said, water no get enemy, we move on. The same goes for people who make resistance more painful than acceptance. This is the law of cause or consequences. Pain shapes social dynamics, intended or unintended. In a social system, the difference between you and any member is the amount of pain you can inflict on them and vice versa. Not exactly the popular way to look at it, but that is exactly what it is. People use that to rise up ranks, basically. Can a soldier or employee order their boss around? The day they do that, there must be a new boss or an empty position. But the opposite can happen and does happen every day. You understand me? No authority exists without your acknowledgement, which is mostly based on what pain they can cause you. So why do things never go as planned? Pain is subjective. People respond to it differently, basically. During the colonial period in India, Delhi, there was something called the cobra craze. The British had also colonized them, but they were troubled by the amount of cobras that kept showing up. I don't know if you've ever seen this trope of the Indian man wearing a turban and playing some kind of wood or wind instrument to charm the snake or whatever. That is them. They have snakes, And the British, the colonialists were like, you know what? For every snake you guys, every dead snake you guys bring, we'll give you some money. Now, what happened is, instead of just getting rid of the snakes, a bigger problem ensued. Instead, people started farming snakes so that they can kill them and collect money. Do you understand? Because pain shapes social dynamics, meaning you can tie social and antisocial behavior to our relationship with pain. When we feel out of touch, out of balance, out of sync, our whole existence will do everything it can to create a counterbalancing force. So that's why people do things like acceptance, just accept the situation and just, I can't change it. It's not for me to change. Escapism, regurgitation, where you pass that now to whoever can bear the brunt of your responses. Like I said, hierarchies are based on who can cause who pain. Or another way they respond is rebellion. People carry, which is actually, it tends to be the most effective in a short period of time, but the least adopted. The majority of people will rather accept or choose escapism into a bottle, into weed, into sex, into something, or regurgitate it into their children, into their employees, into their whatever. People carry pain because they don't know where to put it. When you cause someone pain, they begin to hope for your pain. That's how humans are, wanting to be understood and acknowledged. You may not have even intentionally caused them pain, but because pain is subjective and the status quo is never to show it, we go through this world at half capacity. Pain is actively part of our daily lives. All of us know pain. And when it's easier to take it out on someone, most people will not hesitate to. There are ways to deal with that anyway if you are the receiving end. Does justice exist, and do our actions really catch up with us? One of the characteristics of babies coming into self-awareness is testing their boundaries. It's an expression of their ego. Your ego wants to be acknowledged by you. You didn't choose most of the conditions that created your existence, yet you want some control over your life, so you act out. It helps you feel alive. But when you try to achieve this control by hurting other people and making excuses for prioritizing your own satisfaction, it's not like you are not aware. You are aware of those feelings. You don't have to care, but you are aware. Because humans are social creatures. Most times it's actually a good decision. You should look out for yourself, right? Because we have at the opposite side people who are so in tune with everybody around them that they cannot look out for themselves. But when there's a social dynamic, it's bigger than you, you know? And a lot of people try to take advantage of that. That's where you have like the social parts and everything, where they don't care. They know exactly what's going to happen and they are not affected. They will do whatever they can to put themselves on top. Sociopaths and psychopaths anyway. The child acting up quickly learns from their parents what they can and can't do through consequences. All behavior is shaped by consequences. So if you don't want something to repeat itself, you can just combine the second and third law to design pain. This can have terrible consequences when not used well though. My grandma used to say that you correct a child with one hand and embrace them with the other. That's Oshun, the goddess I talked about previously. Otherwise, you're sowing seeds of hate. That pain must go somewhere. People carry it around, like I said, because they don't know where to put it. You want the pain to become wisdom. Anything else is useless. Justice, to answer the question, is more of a law of the universe than anything else. When you've caused people enough pain, all they want is your downfall. Well, what if those people deserve the pain you caused them? Well, if they don't, your ego is the failsafe that will correct your missteps. A sort of cosmic recoil when you like reactions, like we said. You know, there's an Igbo proverb that says, when a man falls, it was his chi that pushed him. That's why most wicked people end up destroying themselves. You can actually just sit back and enjoy the show, you know, the acceptance thing, or play your role if you're in the cast where you actually actively participate in a rebellion. I'll leave you guys with a question you can answer for me in the whatever Q&A section of this podcast. Why does bad news travel fast? I'll round up this section with a quote from the Bible. The whole city celebrates when the godly succeed. They shout for joy when the wicked die. Proverbs 11:10. Now, how does the agent of chaos use pain to change society? You now have to understand that, like a baby, most people will try to see whatever they can get away with. Letting them realize their mistakes on their own surely works, but sometimes it's more effective to teach people a swift lesson. The Yoruba force and ideology of this in our cosmology is Eshu, the one at the crossroads, the keeper of balance and enforcer of consequences. In the Igbo people have theirs, they call him Ekwensu. The guy is full of tricks. I like him. That's for Eshu and Ekwensu. Same guy, same concept. Climate change today is a consequence of how Western society has abused the world and the life we've been gifted. While sometimes irrational, our ancestors could go as far as sacrificing even their children to balance out perceived consequences of their actions or inactions. I'll briefly describe how African societies were designed using these three laws and give you more practical applications in your day-to-day life. Our ancestors actually understood the importance of honoring our differences. Our societies were designed to reward both individualism and collectivism. You need both for a happy society of any size: merit and support. Each individual needs to prove themselves, and at the same time, they need to know that they are supported by their community if they fail. But that the standard is still there. I don't know if you get, this is an interplay of forces. In Yoruba land, the Oba did not have absolute power. That is not an African concept. That's for the majority of us. Nobody had absolute power. If he was messing up, the people could order him to commit suicide. In Igbo land, they say Igbo Enweze. I don't know if I pronounced that well, but it says Igbo has no king. Each citizen of Igbo land is considered a king and kingmaker in their own right. They just have chiefs. This doesn't mean that we saw ourselves as equal, though. Equal is not the word. We saw ourselves as vital. Because like I said, hierarchies exist based on who can cause who pain. Do you get? The expression of how we saw ourselves as vital is in this Yoruba proverb that if a man sees a snake and a woman kills it, the important thing is that the snake is dead and no longer a threat. So it was not about gender roles or sex roles or whatever, but more about merit and support. We are different. We have different needs, different expectations, different ways of living, different preferences. But we have to share the world. How do we best do that? I go deep into the applications in African society in the article, so you should go read it definitely. But here's how to apply this agency of chaos into your life. In dealing with inertia, you have to find a strong enough force to motivate you, or nothing will change. I talk to my people at recess. I talk to students like almost every day at recess. You can't fake motivation, but you can channel existing motivation. That is the fundamental part of my book. I hated school, and I found a way to channel my own existing motivations to understand myself and design my life around my natural affinities, so that would fuel my vibe to do well in school. Because the motivation can't come from anywhere, so you have to take the time to find out those things. If you need my help, of course, go get my book. There are so many ways to get it. Don't even do it yourself. In dealing with difficulty, that's the second law. We somehow have been sold a lie that we should strive for a life where we don't have to work. It is the most stupid thing I've ever heard. All living things work daily. It is a symptom of life, as my babe Willow will say. When you accept work as non-negotiable, difficulties become a test of your skill. If you know that you can do it with enough attention, then you start to find ways to ease that pain of difficulty. So you have to dedicate enough time in your day for these things that you consider important. Then include a reward during or after. I mean, a practical example for me is sometimes I catch up on my favorite shows when I'm doing chores, stuff like that. Chores never end. There are so many of my friends who I've seen tweeting, complaining about them, but they never end. And so what are you going to do? You have to make space for them, include them into your lifestyle and life cycle. Make space for them, or they'll never get done. But at the same time, when the time comes for you to do them, do you have mechanisms that allow you to make sure that you can get up when you get your notification or reminder that, oh, it's time for me to wash plates, so it's time for me to sweep the house, or it's time for me to do this? Do you have mechanisms that help you and systems that help you feel ginger to do the work? Stuff like that. That's what I explained in my book, Sharp. More practical, is particularly designed for people in school, but it works everywhere. It's a book on mastery of self and of any task. The third law, dealing with imbalance. When you know that you feel out of balance, a simple thing is to trace the root cause. It is not always easy, but with help, it's possible. That's why people go get therapy. Keep asking yourself why until you get to the truth. That is the shortest way to it. If you need to retreat, where I talk about things like escapism and attachments and all these things. See, if it's a human response, by all means, go and do it. Just don't stay there forever, because that is not where your best self comes out, and that is not what you want for yourself. Pain is best faced head on. The more you do it, the stronger you get, and change is inevitable. These three laws are the foundation of all powers of the mind and society. That you change with your environment and change your environment. That nothing changes unless there is a valid pain point and a clear way out. And that pain shapes social dynamics, intended or unintended. With these 3 laws, you're guaranteed to navigate all conflict and change, coming out much smarter, stronger, and satisfied with the outcome. You already know them, now use them.
It's a leap, it's a test, it's a mask, it's a mess. Never rest, ever rest. Pass the touch with a vest. This, 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 pass the touch with a vest.